Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are setting out on a really fascinating intellectual exercise. We're going to put on our hats as international policy auditors to conduct a strict, totally impartial audit of the socialist economic model. We're going to look closely at its theoretical merits and its demerits, breaking down exactly how a centrally planned economy functions on paper. Whether you're already deeply familiar with economic theory or you're just looking for a really clear framework to understand these concepts, this explainer is designed to lay out the facts structurally and, above all, neutrally.
Okay, let's quickly glance at our agenda for today's audit. We'll be covering 1. Defining the model. 2. The triumphs of allocation. 3. The triumphs of security. 4. The pitfalls of calculation. 5. The pitfalls of bureaucracy. And finally, 6. The final balance sheet.
Section 1. Defining the model. Setting the parameters of the audit. Right, so before we can audit anything, we need to know exactly what kind of economic system we are putting under the microscope today.
At its core, a socialist economy completely replaces the profit motive that you would typically find in capitalism. It replaces it with one single overarching goal: social welfare. In this system, all of the productive resources, we're talking the land, the mines, the mills, the banks, they are owned by the entire society and controlled directly by the state. There's absolutely no private property beyond a certain basic limit. Instead, a central planning authority makes all the crucial decisions about what to produce, how to produce it, and who actually gets it, all based on a general plan aimed at benefiting the community as a whole.
Section 2. The triumphs. Allocation. The asset ledger begins. We are officially opening the asset ledger now to look at a major theoretical triumph of this model, which is the highly deliberate allocation of resources.
And this brilliantly illustrates one of the primary arguments for centralized planning. When production is driven entirely by the objective of maximizing social welfare, central planners prioritize basic life necessities. Food, clothing, and basic shelter are bumped right to the very top of the list. And what drops off? Well, luxuries that are normally produced at the cost of those basic needs. Furthermore, all those massive expenditures we see in competitive markets, like the millions upon millions spent on advertising and marketing just to push up sales, those are entirely eliminated as wasteful.
Building on that, a planned economy allows for a comprehensive bird's-eye survey of both the society's needs and its available resources. Because a central planning authority would never intentionally leave resources unused, unemployment is, theoretically anyway, completely eliminated. Everyone is put to work. This overarching control also means the system can prevent the wild economic instability that often plagues free markets. You don't have overproduction or underproduction. Those boom and bust cycles, severe depressions, and even inflation are eradicated. And that's because prices and output are heavily regulated by the state, rather than being left to the unpredictable whims of market forces.
Another major asset on our ledger is how this system handles equality. Because the state owns all the means of production, there's literally no such thing as unearned property income. Every bit of income is earned by working for the state. By fixing appropriate wage rates, the system aims for a truly equitable income distribution. And think about this, because the state is the sole employer, one guided by social welfare rather than a desire to squeeze maximum profit out of its labor, there is theoretically no exploitation. That traditional employer-employee conflict just vanishes, aiming to create a completely classless society devoid of economic struggle.
Section 3. The triumphs. Security, social goods, and planned growth. Let's keep moving down our asset column and look at the massive dividends of social security and planned national growth.
In a socialist system, the state is tasked with providing a massive umbrella of basic facilities to absolutely every citizen. We are talking about guaranteed free housing, free education, comprehensive public health care, and reliable old-age pensions. Beyond just the individual, central planners place a huge emphasis on producing useful social goods that benefit everyone collectively. So that means prioritizing things like the development of clean drinking water systems, expansive public roadways, and robust national defense services, prioritizing those way over individual consumer goods.
Now, you might be wondering, what exactly motivates workers in a system that doesn't have the drive for immense personal wealth? Well, according to the theory, workers are highly motivated precisely because they are guaranteed that social security, equal opportunity, and freedom from exploitation.
On a macro level, because the Central Planning Authority has total control over both consumption and saving, they can essentially force very high national saving rates. This allows the state to funnel massive pools of funds directly into technological research and infrastructure, creating the perfect environment for incredibly rapid, planned economic growth.
Section 4. The pitfalls. Calculation. The liability ledger begins. So we've seen the theoretical triumphs, but a truly impartial audit requires us to flip the page and look at the massive structural roadblocks, and we have to begin with a core problem of calculation.
I want you to pause for a second and really think about this fundamental economic puzzle. If the government owns all the land, all the steel, and all the factories, they obviously don't buy or sell them on an open market. So, without free competitive markets for those factors of production, how do you actually calculate what anything truly costs to make? This right here is the system's biggest theoretical hurdle. So the crucial point we are dealing with is what economists call the rational allocation difficulty. In the complete absence of a market mechanism, there's simply no standard, objective way to calculate the cost of production for different goods and services. Without market prices to act as signals, central planners are essentially flying blind. They cannot easily determine if resources are actually being used efficiently or if the sheer cost of producing an item vastly outweighs its actual value to the community.
Section 5. The pitfalls, bureaucracy, inefficiency, and loss of freedom. This calculation problem we just talked about naturally cascades into serious operational issues. Let's look at the human and political liabilities of centrally controlling an entire nation's economy.
A socialist economy is, by very definition, a massive state enterprise economy. Because everything is centrally planned, every single tiny bit of that plan has to be cleared by bureaucrats. This inevitably leads to heavy, suffocating red tape. The day-to-day work of government departments and autonomous bodies becomes incredibly slow-moving. Simple, straightforward jobs end up taking an unduly long time to complete. In fact, if we look historically, in countries where this kind of rapid socialist transition was attempted, work sometimes ground to a complete standstill, literally forcing leaders to revert back to more liberal policies just to get the wheels turning again.
Alongside those major bureaucratic slowdowns is a severe loss of individual incentives. By totally abolishing private property, free enterprise, and competition, you remove the primary financial motivators that push individuals to excel. Workers basically become government servants, and their jobs are almost always protected, regardless of whether they work incredibly efficiently or completely inefficiently. So while there is definitely a strong system of social safety nets, there is often a glaring lack of an appropriate incentive and disincentive system to actually motivate people to work hard on a day-to-day basis.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it impacts the everyday experience of the citizen. In a capitalist system, the consumer is sovereign. They are king. Production is guided by what people actually want to buy. But under central planning, there is a total denial of consumer sovereignty. Consumers just cannot do anything about prices or availability. Production isn't guided by their preference. Instead, planners have to just guess what consumers want, with no real market compulsion to study the people's actual choices. The end result is inevitably a much more limited variety of goods on the shelves. And this lack of choice extends far beyond just consumer goods. The source material highlights a severe loss of individual freedom in these systems. Freedom of occupation is practically non-existent. Workers are often assigned jobs and they cannot simply quit or change professions without the explicit consent of the Central Planning Authority. Furthermore, maintaining this highly regimented economy often requires stripping away civil and political freedoms. To keep absolute control over the economic plan, freedom of speech and expression is often severely curtailed, leaving citizens entirely unable to freely express their grievances.
3 decades. That is exactly how long Joseph Stalin functioned as a dictator in Soviet Russia. This highlights the absolute extreme danger of this system, the total, absolute concentration of both economic and political power. When the government owns all productive resources and directs literally all economic activity, its power over the individual becomes absolute. Without a foolproof mechanism to ensure the will of the people is heard, it is all too common for a handful of politicians or bureaucrats to seize total authoritarian control.
We conclude our liability ledger with the physical reality of planning. Actually operating a fully planned economy requires an almost insurmountable amount of data, experts, and administrators at every single level. Data deficits are incredibly common, and because it is so incredibly difficult to gather and process perfect information, decisions are frequently delayed, miscarried, or just completely wrongly implemented due to political factors. And ultimately, when the massive planning process has these loopholes and makes large-scale mistakes, it is the common people who end up paying the price.
Section 6. The final balance sheet. weighing the trade-offs. Let's move to bring all of this together. We have audited the assets, the clear triumphs of allocation, stability, and security, and we've thoroughly audited the liabilities, the significant pitfalls of calculation, inefficiency, and the severe loss of freedom.
Which brings us to the core dilemma: guaranteed Social Security, equitable wealth distribution, and full employment sitting on one side of the scale. On the other, the loss of consumer choice, bureaucratic inefficiency, and the very real threat to individual economic and political freedom. We've laid out the textbook economic audit for you today. Now the final task of weighing these profound trade-offs falls entirely to you. Which side of the balance sheet holds more weight for a functional society? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring these vital concepts.